Hello class, welcome to Government and Politics. This week we'll be assessing the role of government and politics within the framework of political science and American government. So I would like to highlight a few things before we get started, and I will begin by mentioning that I have a few items on the Moodle class page. We are in week 14, which runs April 13th through April 19th. And on the home page, we have the campaigns and elections PowerPoint. We also have the unit review, where I have placed summaries of the chapter for campaigns and elections. I have also placed some critical thinking questions that you do not have to answer, but they are more rhetorical to help you understand the thinking and processes around campaigns and elections. We also have keywords and themes for the unit under the unit review, and some interesting links in terms of campaigns and elections. The last item that I'd like to highlight that I've added to the page is worth 20 points, and it is due April 23rd at 11:59 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. It's a 300-word summary, and it relates to what the United States can do in relation to the coronavirus. So take a look at it on the announcements page, and just make sure you're planning your time cycles around the due dates so that you get that in on time. So I'd like to highlight some of the items on the PowerPoint for today. And we're mainly thinking about government and politics and the process of politics within the framework of how government functions. And one of the interesting and important parts of this process is interest groups. And these are groups like the NRA, the National Rifle Association. I know earlier in the semester we had quite a big review of the NRA and some of its policies and some of the challenges, tensions between civil liberties, Second Amendment issues, and public safety. We looked at Lopez versus US 1995, Heller versus DC in 2010, and also thinking about NRA, public safety issues, and the coronavirus. Gun sales have been recorded to be significantly increasing during this time of lockdown. People are very concerned about their safety, and gun sales are increasing. And the NRA is one of those interest groups that's very vocal about protection of Second Amendment and gun rights. Other groups you want to think about would be Planned Parenthood, which specifically speaks to issues like a woman's right to choose and public health issues around women's reproductive rights. Others would be the NAACP, National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, the La Raza, which speaks to Latino people's issues. We have the AARP, which speaks to the rights of the elderly. The American Manufacturers Association, which speaks to issues of U.S. manufacturers, international trade, and the interests of American manufacturing within not only a domestic framework, but also an international framework. And the one of the issues around interest groups is they give wealthy and powerful opportunities to influence public policy makers at different levels of government, which is both a benefit and a challenge. Um, it's a benefit because public interest groups provide very unique experiences and expertise around usually single issue themes. So, for example, NRA is very vocal on gun rights. They have a lot of research and they dedicate a lot of resources towards Second Amendment and gun rights issues. Same with Planned Parenthood, same with the Sierra Club in relation to the environment. So they really are able to influence how bills are made before they're presented to Congress and what kind of things to think about and some of the unintended consequences of government in the public policy making process. The challenge with a lot of interest groups is one, they're single focused. So, for example, as much as the NRA protects the Second Amendment rights to own guns, but that then creates particular tensions when you think about public safety, when you think about issues of homegrown terrorism, neo-Nazi groups, um, individual lone actors that would be interested in um, disrupting um, other people's lives, killing people just for their own personal vendetta or political stance. So it's both a challenge and a benefit in several areas. Thinking about your disturbance theory, to form an interest group to counteract other interest groups is this idea of the disturbance theory. A lobbyist in this perspective is a representative hired by an interest group to push for their particular agenda. And that agenda specific when we're thinking about Congress and laws that Congress will pass. So, for example, if you are the ambassador of Venezuela to the United States, you might want to hire a lobbyist to improve the image of the Maduro regime, President Maduro, in Washington, D.C., so that U.S., for example, could ease sanctions on Venezuela. Many states and municipalities retain lobbyists to work on their behalf in Washington, um, simply because state officials might not have the interest, ability, or capacity to always be based in Washington, and nor would a lot of municipalities have the resources or time to do that. Types of interest groups, you could take a look at those in your time. Public interest groups, economic interest groups, governmental units, political action committees. It's the political season, so you have a lot of PACs, political action committees coming up to support Trump and also to support Joe Biden. We are supposed to have limits in terms of campaign contributions, which officially is the position, but unofficially through political action committees, individuals and politicians are able to raise significant amounts of money by circumventing a lot of the electoral laws relative to how much money an individual can raise. Then you have multi-issues versus single-issue groups. So the American Manufacturers Association would be an example of a multi-issue group. Um, Again, the American Manufacturers Association is an example of a multi-issue group because there's a whole range of different issues they would be addressing, as opposed to the NRA, which is single issue, or the Sierra Club, which would generally be dealing with environmental issues. So keep that in mind when you're thinking about the different interest groups. And I will move forward with political action committees, the acronyms. Take a look at those when you have a chance. Three big economic interest groups, those specific to professions: American Bar Association, labor groups, National Education Association, United Auto Workers, and also farmers organizations. The largest single issue interest groups today concern abortion, Planned Parenthood, and gun control, the NRA. The influence of organized labor has reduced since the 1950s as US jobs, particularly in the Rust Belt, in the Midwest, a lot of manufacturing has moved to cheaper markets in Asia, in Latin America, and in Africa. And as a result, a lot of US jobs have been lost. A lot of union members have lost their jobs, which then affects how much money unions can raise. Thinking about Ralph Nader as the very popular and successful lobbyist around vehicular safety. And I'm trying to move ahead here because I have another 4 minutes. We're not trying to make these reviews substantive rather than too broad. The progressive movement in the 20th century created a huge growth in the level of interest groups. The progressive movement, remember we mentioned this in class early in the semester, was that group in the early 1900s that was working towards very progressive agendas, working rights, labor rights, and those sort of issues. And they grew particularly in the early 1900s and the 20s, 30s with the Great Depression. By the 50s, early 60s, unions started to lose membership, as I've mentioned, because of the loss of their loss of a lot of jobs, and hence union members, and hence contributions to unions. What do interest groups do? Some are non-political. A lot of them are political. They look to increase representation and participation. They specialize in particular agenda items. They increase public awareness. They frame the public agenda. They monitor programs and ensure effective implementation of those programs. Lobbying is essentially centered around Congress through research, money, and testimony. So testimony through Congress's oversight and investigation. Congress can subpoena individuals or groups to come and testify before it on different issues. Through money, the political action committees and how those influence election of representatives, and through research on different issues on public policy. Lobbies are also involved in election activities, candidate recruitments, endorsements, rating candidates on their issues. And interest groups participate in the electoral process in several ways, but they don't not necessarily nominate candidates for office. They contribute money to campaigns, they get out the vote, they rate office holders, and they also endorse candidates. The downside of interest groups is that as they grow, they demand more and more attention, thus increasing the costs on public policy and the size of government. Also because they're single issue groups, a lot of times, like the NRA, they're so focused on Second Amendment rights that other public interests can be lost within the framework of lobbying. So something to think about for the future. Think about the growth of political action committees, 527s, which are lobbying groups for campaigns. Think about how they generate money and how the face of elections is changing within the age of the internet. So again, remember to complete the reflection assignment and stay safe and healthy. Have a good evening.